All right, I know I already took a look at these first couple slides, so I realize there is a little bit of repeat, just going over a couple different things with it. Mentioned to you, books getting published 1950, so it's that post-World War II, Cold War. There's some concern about nuclear war taking place because Russia has missiles, or the Soviet Union has big missiles, you have large missiles, and there's concern with tension that the nuclear holocaust can kind of start to take place. So when the book is getting written, there's certainly concern about threat of war, and then technologies and things like that that we started talking a little bit about yesterday. So the overall content is certainly some concern. Context, mentioned to you, World War II has just ended. World War II, you're coming to a close like 1946, so this would be within about the last 7 years or so. Let's stop. With World War II, how does World War II end so far as with Japan? There you have the dropping of H-bomb twice with Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and at that point, not everyone really necessarily realizes the aftermath when it comes to radiation and things like that, but you certainly recognize that this is a big, powerful, strong weapon. And the concern would be once one country starts to use a weapon of that magnitude, bless you, what's going to keep other countries from using a similar weapon of such magnitude? So there is concern in that way that, hey, if the United States is starting to use this, maybe some other countries would use that as a means to not just end war, but also as a means to possibly end country, civilization, things like that. So when you have hostility in the air among nations, certainly that threat of nuclear war is one thing that's going to be out there. Era of McCarthyism, we're going to talk about that a little bit. Does McCarthyism mean anything that anyone so far as historical context? My guess is that's going to mean no. Joseph, he's a senator from Wisconsin. Okay. We'll talk about it.
Oh, a senator.
Former senator.
Probably.
And then certainly a lot of science fiction books, movies at this time in 1950s are kind of reflecting that fear, nuclear war, just any kind of war really in general, plus technologies, robots and things of that nature. So Fahrenheit 451's not all that different from a lot of other texts that would be taking place at the time. So these will be some things that we'll go into a little bit more detail about as we go through this today.
the salamander.
It's the hearth and the salamander.
Salamander's like obviously real, but the myth with salamander would be that it was the one creature that could survive fire. Roman mythology, Greek mythology goes back to it would be an animal that could survive fire and would actually want to be in fire. It's not really the case. Probably what happened would be they'd be burning logs or something to start a fire and have like a little salamander in it, and it would come out from it. But there's historically the myth, the legend that they'd be able to survive it. So the opening chapter of part one is the hearth and the salamander. Hearth, vocabulary term that you had, remember that's like fireplace, like the stonework, has more of a positive connotation that would go along with it. And then the salamander kind of like this different kind of idea, this mystical being with it. We'll talk about why he goes with maybe that as a chapter title for part one, and we'll look at the chapter titles that he uses for part two and part three as well. There is a film version of Fahrenheit 451 that came out in like the 70s. It's kind of hokey, and that's where a lot of pictures of the different characters are coming from. So we're not going to really take a look at it because I don't think it's going to really relate well with what we're going to be taking a look at. But publication, we're mentioning with Fahrenheit 451 coming after World War II. One of the reasons that Bradbury is really kind of looking at books and literature and the burning of them would be during Hitler's run, you had within Nazi Germany, a lot of books are being burned. In the Soviet Union, you also have a lot of books that are being burned, as well as within communist China. Most of the books, and I shouldn't say most, but a large portion, especially within Soviet Union and China, because both dealing with communist nations, if the country is communist, then religion, formal religion, is basically outlawed. So what would be a main book that is therefore going to be burned? Any kind of religious text. So Bible is certainly going to be one of those. There was the picture, and you're not going to see the character until later on, but it's a Professor Faber, a guy with like the mustard yellow sweater, holding a book. The book that he has there is the Bible. So the Bible is going to show up in Fahrenheit 451. It's not that we're going to be memorizing Bible verses or anything like that, but it tends to be a pretty strong symbol because it goes against communist China, communist Soviet Union, when you have countries who are trying to burn books and eliminate that kind of ideology and belief. McCarthyism. Asked, was anyone kind of familiar with McCarthyism? A little bit of background. McCarthyism is deals with Senator Joseph McCarthy. He's a Republican senator from Wisconsin. 1950s, after World War II, you have Russia gaining Soviet Union a lot more power. You have a strong sense of nationalism, patriotic pride that's taking place within the United States. People want to prove that they're real Americans. You can't really prove that you're a real American, but ways that people would try to be patriotic is basically the opposite of communist. So a way to attack people would go, you have communist connections, or you're wearing red, therefore you must be a communist. There was a strong sense of fear and paranoia. Yeah, you're not going to be the only one here. Strong sense of fear and paranoia that you would have communists when it comes to spies and things like that. So what McCarthy does is he's trying to eliminate as much communism as he can from the country. What he does then is start doing a lot of accusations to people that they're disloyal to the American government, to the American country, basically to the public. There's absolutely no way that you can really, unless a person admits it, that a person's going to be communist. You can't prove value, judgment, political allegiance, and all that stuff. The problem became that if you were accused of being a communist, if you admitted it, you were in trouble. You're basically admitting treason. If you denied it, people would just assume that you were lying because you're a communist, and therefore you're going to deal with punishment. The third option ends up becoming, well, I'm not going to really admit to it, but I can tell you about other people who are communists. So, Ben, you're a communist. No, I'm not, but Logan is. Ends up kind of being the escape clause that people will use. So McCarthyism, you have this wide practice of people making accusations, accusing other people of being communist, fear, paranoia. And so that idea of fear, paranoia spreading all over the place is something that's certainly going to be happening in Fahrenheit 451. maybe in like a history class, Salem witch trials have come up before, where people were accused of witchcraft when in Massachusetts and things like that. That would be similar to like what McCarthyism was taking.
They didn't get burned.
They used to really
Sometimes,
think
yeah.
that was real.
It was real.
What's
Wrong.
I think you're silly.
You believe in guns?
I hate guns.
So within the book, dealing with these issues of communism, or at least the paranoia, worries about the nuclear war taking place and things of that nature, Bradbury claims with the book that he's trying to prevent the future from happening, and we're certainly going to mention that term dystopia, which we used when we were talking about the pedestrian before. Things that and he doesn't certainly say iPhones and earbuds and things like that the same way that we would refer to them, but the idea about iPhones, earbuds, big screen TV, violence being more accepted, things like that, growing illiteracy. And this last part is something that he's really kind of concerned about, the condensing information into sound bites, so you're just hearing snippets of things without knowing the full story. Those are elements that he's really worried about that start to play a part within the course of the book. In part one, they're going to make reference to like person having seashells in ears. They're talking about earbuds, headphones. But in 1953, that's not a common thing that would be around, so there's not like the term earbuds or something like that. But when they mention like seashells, little radios, it'd be the same thing as earbuds. Within the pedestrian, talked about having everyone watching TVs as Leonard is walking up and down the streets. In Fahrenheit 451, Montauk Guys, the main character, his wife Millie is obsessed with TV. Entire walls within houses are going to be TV. So you have a TV screen here, TV screen there, TV screen over there, so you're constantly immersed with those things.
That's too much TV.
Why?
That's a TV.
I mean, Logan said, what, 80%?
May I use the restroom?
But why TV?
Because they, boob tube. That's what they call it.
Yeah, that's not answering why it's too much TV.
Because you can't do that to yourself. Can I get to the bathroom?
In a minute. When we talk about sound bites, condensing information into sound bites, one of the positives, the benefits, and I'm not trying to put you on stage. I think you said good part about technology keeps you informed. That was you yesterday? How do most of us stay informed about issues that are going on?
The news.
World Star. They do tell you everything in the whole
That's your sole source of news.
That's all I get.
Philippines stuff.
All
Mine's a lot. Snapchat.
Yeah, I got
What, what do you mean though when you say CNN?
Apple Pay. No,
You
CNN story on Snapchat.
CNN is. That's why.
Hold on, too many. When you say CNN though, are you going to CNN website? Are you watching CNN on news? Is it a link to CNN article on something else? Okay. Everything.
everything. It always
No, I watch.
I watch the Fox News networks because Waterworld's on.
How much time do you think, and not a particular story, how much time would you say you would spend reading one article? And it could be about news, it could be about Steelers playing Jaguars, it could be about Alabama national championship. But when you're reading something that is quote unquote news, how long do you think you would spend reading an article about it? Are we talking seconds, minutes, 15 minutes? And certainly depending upon the length of the article, but
That's okay. I'm gonna read the whole thing.
so skim through the whole, like kind of skim through it, focus on interesting parts. Okay. So, and certainly news people are going to be aware of that. So you're going to have kind of little sound bites, pictures, headlines where you have the quote unquote interesting parts of the story. The issue that Bradbury would be concerned about is then that you have essentially a sound bite or a snippet of information as opposed to getting the full story. There's certainly going to be cases where that's going to be okay and appropriate. There's going to be other times where that could end up being problematic because it's not that people could be misinformed, but it's that people would be uninformed, and that's his main concern that he truly has. So that condensing of information is a concern that he is certainly going to have. this statistic is not new to you. It got, when you were watching the background information for the pedestrian, when we did those notes online, had similar thing, where he's really looking at the rise of TVs that would be taking place. 1945, fewer than 10,000 television sets. By 1950, 6 million. By 1960, you have over 60 million, and certainly that number is continuing to grow. You can find other forms of media where that same thing would happen. Smartphone, quote unquote smartphone, when did they debut?
2000.
2000. Well, but more like the way that we use today with like touchscreen interaction. 2007, I think, is when the first iPhone came out, and then after that, we certainly had more things and whatnot. So it's like 10 years.
Everything good came out in 2006 and 7.
YouTube
Still
came
ain't
out
won
in
a Super Bowl in 2008.
I was going to come up with a story I'll talk about Luke, but
What do you say?
Yeah, say it, Mr. King.
I didn't come up with
You
anything.
want me to
So
flip a table today? Say it.
no, because then that's going to be disruptive to the beautiful people downstairs. Actually, I think we're over like a bathroom. So really, we need to be disruptive.
Oh, yeah.
I think we are, right?
Yeah,
We're going, yeah.
it's like that, like,
We don't want to disrupt anyone going to the bathroom during their lunch period.
what's it?
But 10 years ago, smartphone debuts. Percentage of adults, so this would be 18 and over, certainly, you folks can certainly have cell phones as well. Percentage of adults that currently have a smartphone in the U.S.?
94.
It's not quite, I thought it'd be a little bit higher. It's like 78. It's pretty close to it. But you're talking essentially 3 out of 4, 4 out of 5. For adults that you have in the country, you're looking at roughly 200 million adults, a little bit more. So you're taking 3/4 of that, 80% of that number, you're talking about 160 million all of a sudden. So within a 10-year period, you have a device that has really grown by hundreds of million and is certainly going to continue to. So he's concerned about TVs. Certainly technology is something that is still out there and growing exponentially. Doesn't mean it's bad. But the issue is, does your whole life become absorbed in that one aspect of technology? That is something that he would say is bad. Tomorrow, which is Wednesday, Thursday and Friday, we're going to watch video. And you still have a little study guide you can answer. But we're going to take a look at a documentary. It's called Digital Nation, which came out in 2010. So it's after like smartphones have been introduced. But it's going to be taking a look at in what ways maybe has technology limited capacity to think certain ways. Is technology a good thing? Absolutely. Is it beneficial? Absolutely. But the concern would be maybe there's too much dependency with technology, which would certainly be an idea that Bradbury's trying to go with.
Like the good old pizza nuts.
All the smartphones.
How did we go from smartphones to Pizza Hut?
When smartphones just came out, all they were was to do old stuff up on the
Yeah, so it was like
Yeah.
texting, and then whenever you.
Oh yeah, it was when it first came out. It was kind of like combining because the iPod was out at that point. Like early, I don't remember exact year, about 2002, 2003.
They had the
was when
little iPods
iPods.
first, the
Yeah.
blue squares.
The people, it was good for joggers. Kind of clicked on like nanos and all that stuff. So the first smartphones were really kind of combining that iPod with the whole ability for phone. I mean, I remember phone where you hit the 2 button 3 times to get to the letter C. Then you hit the 2 button 1 time to get to an A, and then all that stuff. It was big when you started to get the little drop down
Oh
keyboard.
yeah.
I love the
But-
top-down keyboard.
It was combination of texting, phone calls, and I'd say music and internet.
And they had them Blackberry.
Of those things, and this is again, this isn't meant to be that we're terrible people because of it. Texting, say internet for internet, like include social media, all those things. Texting, internet, phone, music. Of those 4 things, like phone call, which do you probably use least on the phone?
Wait, what?
Phone.
I'll always be called actually. I be FaceTiming that.
And you could argue is that's now kind of like the new phone call. I'd say that's more like a phone call than social media.
I make tons of phone calls.
I know for me, that would probably be the 4th thing that I use would be the actual phone call. If I need to get in touch with someone, I'm gonna text someone probably rather than phone call. That's annoying that my mom doesn't have a cell phone that she'll check text messages, because if I need to talk to her, I quote unquote have to talk to her.
My
That's what my
grandma
dad always complained about.
So certainly the changes with it, you know, there's effects that happen, and that lessening of communication would be a big concern that Bradbury would have. World going crazy also from a political standpoint. Talk about technology and increase of use of TVs and phones and things like that. Not only technology, government is a major concern of Bradbury's as well, and this is a conversation that still comes up year after year after year. After Cold War, Bradbury sees governments taking larger, greater amounts of power, and kind of has the question, how could a government with too much power end up being dangerous? When it comes to governments today, and I'm not just talking like U.S. government, I'd say surveillance is probably one of the concerns that people have the most. Whether it be back, we're talking about phones, wiretapping, listening in conversations, but privacy ends up being a big concern.
That makes zero sense if you think of it.
With the wiretapping?
Yes.
With traditional landline phone company, it's basically all the conversations go into database, so it's just kind of accessing those things. It's not so much wiretapping that people worry about now, but the new thing is, especially after Christmas, a lot of folks have a new member in their family. Alexa tells jokes, gives you the weather, or the
You got
Google
Alexa?
Home, Siri. I do. Of my 3 daughters, she's my favorite. Number one, she doesn't throw up at night. The other one did. Or one of them did. And she only talks when I ask her a question. And the food bill for her is rather low. So things are working out pretty well. But the concerns that people have with privacy is Alexa is a speaker, but it's also a microphone. You talk into it. So if you have the microphone on, you know, is Devin sitting at the other end listening to it? Some people would say yes. Some people say no. A lot of
Google thing.
the Google Home.
Yeah,
I talk
they
to people.
someone's wife got sick.
Well, and with that whole privacy issue, after it's 2008, it was 2015, I think, 2015, 2016. The no, but I think it was 2015. There was there was shooting in California, the San Bernardino attacks. One of the big issues that was happening at that time was one of the assailants had a cell phone, iPhone on them. FBI wanted to go through the iPhone to see about contacts and things like that. Who had the rights to it? Apple, and Apple wasn't going to give it up because of privacy issues. Where you'll have some people going, you should give it up because you're dealing with national security, others going, no, privacy. Now, FBI was able to circumvent that and go through a third party, which was able to still kind of hack into the phone. But when it comes to the speakers, it's still that same kind of idea that if, and there have been cases before where, yes, they've said about it's been able to save someone's life. There was, when Alexa first came out with the Echo speaker, it was tried to be admitted as evidence because it would have recorded a crime that took place. I don't remember if it was a murder or robbery or whatnot. And Amazon was going, no, we want to hold on to it because of security of data. So the whole idea about security, privacy, surveillance, those are issues that really kind of that people have strong beliefs about. Within the book, you're going to see that the government has a pretty strong network of ways of kind of keeping eyes and caps on everything in town.
Nice.
But again, it kind of comes back, how much power is dangerous when it comes to control over other people? Do you want to have a government that is going to give you complete privacy? Do you want a government that is going to monitor everything? Or do we look for something in between? Mentioned to you futuristic, we're taking a look at about 24th century, so we're like 2300s. Background with the book, books are considered dangerous and illegal. If you have one, it will be taken from you, it will be burned. If you happen to be burned in the fire, oh well, one less person who's going to own the book. So now you're illegal if it's 24th century because you are owning a book. Most people are fine with this. So they're happy to be plugged into their technology where they don't have to kind of think too hard. Any book that's found is going to be burned. How this point gets emphasized about being plugged in is going to be essentially those wall-sized TVs that folks are immersing themselves in throughout the course of the book.
Like really, like actually plugged in, like with wires or?
Well, no, plugged in, like quote-unquote connected. We're not going to have robotic. Although we do have robotic dogs, so they have wires. In the book, rather than the Dalmatian puppy for every fire station, it's a mechanical hound. Mentioned this to you yesterday, the firefighters aren't going to stop fires, they're the ones who are going to start them. And of course our number for our company is 451, dealing with our degrees that we have. Mentioned this to you last time, dystopia, dystopic novel. This means future is bleak, dark, and dreary. So there's going to be some contrast where you have some characters who are meant to kind of bring a little bit of light and life to the world, but those are going to kind of be the outcasts because everyone else is going to be a little bit more robotic in nature, even though they're not literally in, so to speak. Two main themes. One being censorship, the other one being overall ignorance. And again, ignorance in this case, that doesn't mean that a person's being rude or anything like that, but there's a lack of knowledge, you just don't know. So if we were to say a person is ignorant, it doesn't mean that you're being mean to someone else or said a rude comment, it would be a lack of knowledge or simply unaware of what's going on. If information is censored, a byproduct of that would be ignorance of knowledge. And that's certainly something that still does kind of happen today. There are websites that if you are in some countries where there's a little bit more government control, you could look up a website in the United States. As far as you know, if you go to another country, China, North Korea are the ones mentioned most often, those same websites would not come up. So access to knowledge that Jillian or Tommy might have here, that might not necessarily happen in other places. If you need to find something out, generally what do?
I asked Google.
Look it up on Google.
So going through Google, Google gives you websites and whatnot. Of all websites that are available, and I'm not talking about I'm not including websites where you have like online trafficking of illegal activities and stuff like that.
Cool.
But websites that just have information, how much of that is Google actually going to pull in? You're probably looking at less than 25%, a quarter of those websites. So it doesn't mean the information that you get is bad, but the whole idea is that maybe the access to the information might not be as wide as we think it is. So if you have censorship that limits what you're able to locate through like a search engine, that 25% could get whittled down to 15 to 10 to 5%. So at that point, you kind of get fed with knowledge that people might want you to know. If you were to type in a search item, I type in a search item, Luke types in a search item, Ben types in a search item, it's very possible, especially with Gmails, which we all have in this room, that the information that we get back could be very different. I might type in something about Egypt. Person could get soccer scores back based on Egyptian teams. Someone might get information coming back about airline tickets to take a vacation in Egypt. Someone else could get information coming back based on like Egyptian history and government and all that kind of stuff. Why do they tailor the information coming back? It's based on previous searches. So if a person tends to look for athletic, sport events, things like that, scores, you're going to get more of that information coming back. Is it traditional censorship? No, but it's still kind of limiting access to some information that you might not necessarily be able to get otherwise.
It's based on cookies.
Yeah. So censorship from the way that Bradbury's looking at it would be the suppression of speech or the deletion of communicative material. He's not worried about necessarily song lyrics and swear words within like TV shows or books or things like that, but he's looking at things that would be considered objectionable, sensitive, or inconvenient to a government because that's his main kind of object that he's dealing with. So why would something be censored, or what are the dangers of censorship? Well, if it's going to pose a threat to the government, therefore it'll end up kind of being censored. The dangers of censorship depends on the angle that you're looking at. As a citizen, folks could argue the danger of it is it limits the ability of information. dangers of not providing censorship. Others would argue it could allow for any kind of activity to take place that could be harmful to government and things of that nature. So ignorance of knowledge, lack of knowledge due to that censorship is the main thing that Bradbury's going to focus on. We got a picture of a sheep because he would argue that people blindly follow one another and you don't have any real thought taking place. Individual creative thought, you're simply doing what it is you're supposed to do or supposed to be told.
What if you have a sheep dog?
Know what you're saying.
We don't because they're all mechanical again. No pets. Pets cause happiness. No happiness in Fahrenheit 451.
Why?
So some themes that we're going to look for. You want to write these ones down. Individual self-expression certainly is significant. Violence is self-destructive. Violence is condoned a little bit more within the Fahrenheit 451 world than it would be in 2018. The idea of mindless pleasure-seeking in materialism makes for an empty life. So if you are constantly, quote-unquote, plugged in or looking for that entertainment, then there's not going to be any real satisfaction, happiness taking place. And humanity should preserve and value culture of the past. Knowing about history, knowing about where people have come from is a vital, critical aspect to understanding who we are as a country. So those would be the main themes that he's going to include. Symbols, we're going to certainly have fire, books. What do we kind of associate along with fire? Just to put it out. Water. So fire, water, books are all going to have some kind of elements to them. Salamander, we had our title with part 1. We'll kind of talk about symbolic value of that and whatnot. Tommy, you're asking about books? Yeah. Certainly, like when we think about a book, you just think about something that you read. Because it's forbidden, because it's illegal in Fahrenheit 451, he doesn't view it quite as the same way, but it's more, I don't want to say like holy, but more like a sacred object that shouldn't be tampered with, but it's one that the firefighters are putting out all the time. If there's a rumor that Tommy has a book, you're going to have people knocking down your door and searching through your house to find the books. You're going to be arrested, and then the books are all going to be burned. So it's kind of symbolic of that lack of privacy, that surveillance, everyone knowing everything about you, whereas books should be a way for you to kind of escape freedom of expression. And if you're not allowed to have books, you certainly aren't going to be reading. If you don't need to read, there's not going to be the ability to write. And the downfall with that be if you don't write, you don't really express yourself as much anymore.
Maybe you could just scream what you thought, and then you could express yourself. How do you think?
If
Mr. Kane!